Sure.
All right, well, welcome everyone. I'm glad to be with you to chat about growth mindset. Hi.
Hey.
Oh, so many faces I haven't seen in so long. This is lovely. So our topic today is about growth mindset, and I sent out an agenda, but I'd love to hear from one or two people about what made you decide to come and give even more time at CIIS this evening. What about what you read was appealing to you? My plan for our time together is to speak a little bit about what we know about harmful behavior, repetitive harmful behavior, and how what we know and the research that's going on can help us to support people to shift their mindsets and support shifting their behaviors by doing so. And we're going to do then, I'm going to try and chat about that just for about 20 minutes or so, and then we'll do an applied activity where we get to really look at what this can look like in a coaching setting. And then I'm going to talk more about growth mindset and resilience and how to promote that for clients. And then we'll again do another activity. So we have 2 hours together. Does it seem like people do want to have a break in between that 2 hours, or shall we go right on through?
Right on.
Okay, so yeah.
Well, if there's consensus that people need to use the bathroom or something like that.
Okay,
then
so
maybe
we'll
let's
check
take a
in
break.
after the first activity and see how people are feeling. You can obviously go use the bathroom at any time. It's being recorded, so you can see what you missed. All right, so first thing I want to start out with actually is a prayer for our time together. So you're welcome to close your eyes or not. And if you wouldn't mind putting away anything that's distracting you, just to center us in our intention here together today. May our time together today support resilience for ourselves and for others, that they may know deeply their own capacity for growth and learning and ability to respond. May our time together today inspire new insights towards connecting ourselves and others to resources, so that they do not feel overwhelmed by the adversities of life, but instead feel resourced and able to respond. And that maybe even we can start to cherish our challenges as opportunities to see our own strength. I hope. So I've been interested in adversity research for a while. Adversity, just another name for challenges that we experience in our lives. I was pretty interested in this, and it's part of what got me started in cognitive psychology and neuroscience, because I was reading studies that were saying that to the extent that you've had a hard childhood, you are that much more likely to be an addict. And that was really hard for me to see, because I, in my home as a child, had a parent who was an addict, and had a parent who was abusive to another parent, and had the divorce of parents, and experienced a lack of access to resources by means of not having very much income in my family at an early age. And so as I was reading these studies, I was going, well, it seems like I'm fucked. And then I would think about that, and sometimes I would think, yeah, wow, yeah, it does seem like it's more likely for me to like be addicted. And then sometimes I would think, kind of think I'm pretty awesome. And I seem to have like a really good ability to respond to challenges that go on in my life. And all things considered, I seem to be like navigating this pretty well. So what's going on here? Why am I not doomed? And so as I've started to learn how to respond to my difficulties, how to resource myself when difficulties arrive, and how to shift from a feeling of overwhelming doom or hopelessness or failure, it actually has developed in me a deep strength and also a compassion, because I know what it's like. And I'm so grateful for that. And I still have times where I say like, gosh, if my parents would have been around more, I probably wouldn't have such an issue with chocolate. But overall, I definitely don't feel doomed. And so I've been looking more and more into the research on adversity. And there's the initial research on adversity, you may have come across it in Gabor Mate's work, and I've talked about it before in our classes. Essentially it was a huge study. The primary study that tends to be referenced is a study of about 17,000 people, and it was a nationally representative sample, which means that most socioeconomic status and race and gender and all of that was represented. And what they were finding is that experiences of adversity during childhood were correlated with health disparities later on. Now, what has been coming up in recent research from Siri and others, who gets quoted a lot in Kelly McGonigal's work, who some of you know, is that in fact, a moderate level of adversity, some challenge, is actually a determinant of higher well-being, better immune response, and resiliency overall. Moderate level. And so I started getting really interested. Why is there this contradiction in the research? And what does this all really mean? And as I've been exploring with my clients, what I'm noticing is that it's very reflective of a fundamental human condition. That we have two primary drives that impact the way that we behave and the way that we make decisions, which ultimately determines our health and happiness in the world. One of them is basic self-preservation. I want to know what's going to happen, and I want to be safe. And that drive will motivate us towards certainty and structure. Even if it means certainty of men. Sometimes we choose that over the uncertainty of something new. The second drive is another fundamental human drive, and that's the human drive towards growth. And growth requires change, and change requires uncertainty because we're trying something new. And these things often contradict each other within us. Because one of our inner voices is saying, just do what's safe, just do what's predictable, just do what we know to be true. And the other one is saying, I want to be exhilarated. I want to be challenged. I want to know my own strength. And if I only do what I already know and what is already predictable, I won't have that experience. So, how do we then coach ourselves and our clients to be able to respond to adversity? Because adversity is inherent. Do any one of us have a life where there's no adversity, no challenge? It's part of the human condition, right? There will be death. There will be aging. There will be illness. There will be unexpected change. There will be heartache for each of us. So the goal of wellness coaching is not to eliminate adversity, but instead to help folks to navigate how to respond to that, develop resilience. Now, I'm not suddenly advocating like a pro-trauma approach. And be careful, because if you take this kind of spiritual path of like, yeah, universe, give me some challenges, I want to see my own strength, you'll get them. So be careful. Give me those challenges I need in order to see the spaces within me which are embodying separation, or which are allowing a belief in the belief that I'm somehow not valuable or that I'm wrong. And let me use those experiences to learn about myself, to learn about wholeness, to be reminded of my inherent value. So, that's where we're working with growth mindset. Now, why then is the topic of addiction included here? Why would I include addiction in this conversation? Say more.
Well, when you're dealing with addiction, what I've seen is it's a something that you have to be constantly aware of, and it either pushes you one way or the other.
So, throw out some things that you can be addicted to.
Anything.
Cigarettes?
Anything.
Anything, but let's name some.
Alcohol.
Shopping.
Attention, alcohol, shopping, sex, heroin, relationships, sugar, crack.
Same difference.
Now, if we're in the field of wellness coaching, my assumption is that we're supporting people to make behavior change. Now, when is it that we want to make behavior change?
When you don't like your behavior. It's
When you
not
don't
working
like
for
your
you.
behavior, when it's not working for you. That's right. I don't have clients who come in and they're like, you know, been really doing a lot of yoga, speaking compassionately with my friends, dancing and celebrating, learning all day. I need your help.
I'm really fulfilled.
I'm too fulfilled.
Help me.
Right? We come in when there's a contradiction going on for us. When we say, wow, I know that this is not in my highest good, but I'm doing it anyway. And for me, that is a description of addiction. Yeah.
I also think we're seeking support because this change process can be very uncomfortable, and it can bring up all these things that you utilize those coping mechanisms to deal with, and sometimes it's an amplification of the addiction because you're trying to find that balance somehow again. So
That's right.
having support during that time would be great.
Yes. And the amplification of the addiction is actually a beautiful gift disguised as this terrible thing. The gift of that is that it exposes to us the mechanism behind the behavior. When we can understand the mechanism behind the behavior, we can understand the need, the unmet need that we are trying to respond to. And when we know that need, we now have a tool to start to meet that need in a different way. We have clarity, we have understanding. So that is actually the most important time. The time when it feels the worst, the time when it feels like it's the most charged or you're the most reactive. That is actually the most potent time for the self-awareness that is our primary tool for self-directed well-being. Addiction is one possible response to stress. When we are stressed, it is because there is a need that is not being met. And so part of growth mindset is about learning to be compassionate with oneself in order to be able to meet one's needs. rather than being judgmental or critical or have expectations that are unrealistic of oneself, which is our typical motive response. When Mate defines addiction, he says it's any behavior that involves craving and that is satisfied by a temporary relief, which is very similar to what some of you have come across with Elliot Dasher's work, and is the perception of addiction that I want to propose tonight, which is any behavior that we take that allows our own intrinsic value to be placed on something outside of ourselves. So for instance, you mentioned relationships. If this person loves me, I am lovable. Someone mentioned success. If I succeed in this job, or if I do well in this career, then I am valuable. It is a conditional kind of self-evaluation. And if our self-evaluation is conditional, it means we're allowing for the possibility that we are not valuable. And we are attaching our value to something that is conditional. If something is conditional, it means that its state changes, right? Sugar. So that during the time that this thing is present, I feel the value, I feel the happiness, I feel the pleasure, and then when it's not present anymore, I don't. And we're setting ourselves up for a conditional kind of happiness and a conditional kind of self-value. Because the very thing we're attaching our value to, our happiness to, is impermanent. Everything we named here is impermanent. And so to truly get to the root of addiction is to remember at the deepest sense of who we are, our own unquestionable, unchangeable value. There are many reasons why that gets questioned. Our family experiences are one of them. We may have relationship dynamics, especially early on, that affirm to us that we are not valuable or worthy. Or that affirm to us that our worth is dependent on how well we do at something, or dependent on the shape of our body. Media certainly perpetuates that as well. You don't have enough, and here's the thing you need to be enough. So we know that certain adverse experiences are much more likely to result in addiction. Primarily physical and sexual abuse in early childhood. In some studies, nearly 5,000 times more likely to become an addict later on in life. However, in certain situations, we can actually find resilience from challenge. So how do we resolve that? According to Mate's work, no matter what age, if you respond with compassion and unconditional regard, that is the remedy to remove oneself from addiction. Habitual, repetitive behavior that is creating temporary relief, but in the long term is creating harmful health impacts. So let's talk about what creates healthy brain development. And I want to say that Mate really focuses on very early childhood. He focuses on ages 0 to 3, or in the womb to 3, however you indicate age. And the reason he focuses on that is because we, of all animals, have the most brain development outside of the womb. And the reason that is that it allowed for us to evolve to have much bigger brains, much larger prefrontal cortexes without killing the mothers during birth. Because we have just this wide of hips. And so birthing a child and then continuing to develop the brain outside of the womb allowed for this exponential growth in our brains, which is sometimes beautiful and sometimes agonizing. And so especially during those 3 years, it's a very important period. And Mate says that for healthy brain development, especially the brain circuitry related to addiction, which is primarily what he calls motivation and reward circuitry, which is our dopamine circuitry, which is primarily what is impacted in addicts. That in order to develop a healthy dopamine circuitry, we need the presence of a non-stressed, emotionally available, constantly available caregiver. Now, I think Mate went he overcorrected a little bit when he said constantly available. In later research, we're finding that resilience is developed when there is a caregiver who is neither overly attentive or under-attentive. So perhaps Mate just meant they're constantly available, but that doesn't mean they're constantly telling you what to do. And maybe some of you have a primary caregiver who fits the description of overly attentive, and you know what I'm talking about right now, right? And so that's the description for childhood. Most of us are going to be working with adults, but guess what? It's the same thing that's needed. It's just that this time you might be getting it from your wellness coach. Ideally, you have a really good wellness coach who is helping you become self-directed and independent in your own care, and they're teaching you how to give it to yourself. And so how can we start to teach ourselves and our clients how to be consistently available, compassionate, emotionally available caregivers to ourselves? In order to be compassionate and consistently available, we have to start to look at the parts of us that judge and shame and create guilt about those habitual patterns that we have developed. So I'm going to take this back to something that I think most of us are probably familiar with, which is the trans-theoretical model of behavior change. Is this, how many, raise your hand if this is not the first time you're seeing this, you've seen this before? Okay, so this is what's used in most kind of coaching fields, and what we're looking at is what people typically go through if they're going to think about changing a behavior. And I want to invite you to start thinking about a behavior. Start with one that you are hoping to change right now that might feel like an addiction for you. And if that doesn't feel alive for you, think about one that has been that for you in the past, just as we're talking about this. And so the idea is that there is a stage of pre-contemplation, and pre-contemplation essentially is characterized by, I can't do that. That's not for me. I'm not doing that. Then we go to the stage of contemplation, which is entertaining the idea that the behavior change might be something that you can do. Then we go to preparation, which is a shift in mentality of saying, I'm actually determined to do this, and I'm getting myself ready to do this. And then we go to action. I'm doing it. Now, either we move from action to maintenance, and we now take on this new behavior, or we go back to what we were doing before. How many of you, when you were attempting to change a behavior that had been ingrained for quite a while, went from this, the first time you tried something new, to this, maintaining that new thing for the rest of your life until now. It's funny because it doesn't happen.
Right.
And yet, you will often find that when you're working with your coaching clients, they say, I'm going to commit to this new behavior, and then they come in the following week and they go, I tried it once, it didn't work, and then I did the other thing, and I can't do this now, and I suck, I'm just really bad at this. I've tried it before, and I know I can't do this. This just reminds me that I'm not good enough for this, in some variation of that. Do we all know this experience in our own lives as well? So that is the point that I believe is the most potent moment for you as a coach to begin to teach growth mindset. When I go from here to relapse, and I respond to the relapse with guilt, shame, or hopelessness, which stage am I going to go to next?
Relapse, for sure.
So when you have relapsed and you're responding to relapse with shame, then what?
Give up.
You give up. Back to pre-contemplation. For who knows how long. And it's going to probably be even harder to get from pre-contemplation to contemplation, because now you've solidified in your mind that experience was representative of you either not having what it takes or somehow being fundamentally wrong or broken. And so all the more reason for you to stay here. Yeah.
So you read about and you hear people say, you relapse, and not only did you gain the 20 pounds back, you gained another 20. So then I gained the weight back that I lost, and I added more. And does that play into the more judgment? So now you even judge yourself more harshly because you couldn't do it?
Yeah, so what I want to relate that to for the purposes of this conversation is a potential indicator of a fixed mindset, which I'm going to get more into in the second half. But effectively, that someone thinks this is an indication that my core ability is low. And if my core ability is low, I'm less likely to try, and I might even be more likely to say, screw this, I'm going to eat all the butter, sugar stuff. So, growth mindset is really reflective of a sense of compassion and curiosity. Surprise, surprise, you've heard me say those words probably more times than you can stand now. But it's reflective of a self-inquiry, an ability to be with oneself in one's suffering and in one's confusion and in one's perceived negative choices. So that when relapse occurs, instead of saying, what the heck is wrong with me, or I'm never going to do this, I instead open to say, wow, I see that you've done this. I'm so curious. Why did you do this? And maybe with that kind of listening, real listening, maybe from a coach, maybe from ourselves, we can start to express our truth. Well, you know what? I was feeling like life really wasn't worth it if everything had to be so scheduled and so regimented. And so this eating of this thing was a statement to myself that I was going to take care of myself and that I was going to bring in things that bring pleasure to myself. Oh, interesting. I see that that's a need for you. I see that it's a need for you to really bring in pleasure and to bring in a sense of self-soothing. What kinds of things could we do during those times that would allow us to create that for you, to meet that need in a way that didn't create long-term harm? And suddenly this part of you is on board. And it says, oh, well, maybe instead of having 4 hours on the computer, we could just have 2. And then we could go for a walk in nature. And you could go, okay, I can see how that would probably have been more balanced. So when that compassion and curiosity comes on board, the likelihood now of going back to preparation, and even a more informed preparation that brings more likelihood of a success, or straight back to action, is much higher. Because it didn't mean, oh, I don't know how to do this and something's fundamentally wrong with me. It meant, oh, I was trying to meet a need in a way that wasn't overall successful. Let me validate that for myself and get to know how I can meet that need. Because addiction is a tool to respond to stress that is created from an unmet need. Not because one lacks willpower or is fundamentally broken or lazy or all these other stories that we can tend to tell ourselves. Any questions about this stuff so far? Or just thoughts or answers?
Could you repeat the last thing you just said again?
People ask me to do that and I'm like, what did I say?
It was about
You said
addiction is a That's what she tool, said, 'cause I wasn't doing the same thing I was.
That when we respond with a judgment of self, the underlying narrative that we're telling was that something intrinsic about us is wrong or broken. Like, I just don't have the willpower, I can't figure it out, or I'm somehow self-destructive. But when we respond with compassion and curiosity, the narrative that we're telling is, oh, there is an unmet need here, and I've been meeting that unmet need that has generated stress or dis-ease in my body through this tool that I know. And the tool that I know is sugar, and the tool that I know is sex, and the tool that I know is overworking. But it's not because I'm lazy, it's not because I'm wrong, it's not because, right? It's because I don't have the resource yet. Yeah, so Sarah and Regina, and yeah.
So, I'm just making sure. I don't know how to say this. So what if it's sort of like you've evolved, you've moved past a lot of stuff, and there's this very visible growth going on that's only been a result of the hard work that you've done. And when the sort of discomfort of that new identity is coming up for you, it still doesn't, I'm wondering, is that still an unmet need? Or sort of you are satisfying those needs now, you are finding that's why you're leading to the growth, but there's still this discomfort with the new identity that some of the behaviors can emerge? Or is it still that you haven't filled that gap? Do you know what I'm saying about?
So a couple of things that come to mind with that. I'm not totally clear, but
Yeah.
let me say what's coming to mind, then you can tell me if I've kind of gotten to it.
Yeah.
One is that this is a process of developing self-trust.
Mm-hmm.
And we are scientists in our lives. If 99 out of 100 times I've used a self-soothing behavior of video games, I'm working with one client right now who's addicted to video games, I'm probably not going to trust myself not to do the video games next time. Mm-hmm. When I start to maybe have one example of a time when I used a different tool, then I might have a little bit of self-trust, but I'm still going to be like, hey, 1 out of 100 times you did that. So over time, we start to develop that self-trust. Mm-hmm. And the important thing then when working with clients is to really bring attention to the process and to really affirm for ourselves and for our clients, to really affirm when we have done that thing differently and to reflect on, hey, what quality was that in you that did that? And guess what? Every time you do that, you're building new neural pathways and new trust in self. And the more times you do it, the deeper that trust is going to get. Now that's one piece. The other piece is that we're scared shitless about how powerful we are. Mm-hmm. And to the extent that we begin to embrace, just for you watching, Sarah went, so I think she thinks that was it. the extent that we're willing to embrace our power.
Are you talking about us as a coach or us as an individual?
I'm gonna say of humans
Of humans, yeah, okay.
in general. We are very often reticent to be in our full power because it's uncomfortable, it's new, and because it's just not what we're used to. And so for that part of us, which is about self-preservation, which is about always making sure we're safe, that represents total uncertainty. Because to be fully embracing of one's power does not mean that you know exactly what's going to happen and you're going to say, every single time this happens, I know that I'm going to respond this way. And I know it's going to be certain that I'll never eat those things again, or I'll never yell at my partner again, or it's not that. It's that you have chosen to respond to yourself with unconditional regard, curiosity, and compassionate determination, no matter what happens. That's the consistent variable. The consistent variable is your way of being, not the outcome. And so, I think maybe that might be some of the discomfort of change. And we're going to talk about these different parts and how they can negotiate with one another instead of being constantly undermining each other and in battle. Like, do you get what I'm saying with like, you're going to sit here all day and write your paper because you did nothing yesterday, so sit down and deal with it. And the other part of you going, oh, really? What's going on Facebook? You know what I'm saying? And they're undermining each other and they're fighting with each other. And then you've got this other part that goes like, man, you're terrible, and man, you're terrible, and look at you, and oh, this. Right? And so part of this work is about learning about what is the wisdom and the needs of those parts, not judging them. Not saying, you lazy fool who only cares about pleasure, and you jerk who is so rigid and perfectionistic, but instead saying, oh, wow, you have the wisdom of keeping me determined to grow and to succeed. And you over here, you have the wisdom to make sure that's all worth it. And that I stay open and aligned with love and caring for myself. Beautiful. How can we both align with those needs? Because those needs are not controversial. I need safety, I need growth. So now, can we all come together and talk about how to meet those needs in a balanced way? Okay, did that get it? So, let's see. I'm just aware of the time right now. I'd really like to actually jump into this partner work. So I want to ask, were your questions crucial enough that you feel like you need to have them answered right now? Yeah, Regina, do it.
What if, for example, quitting smoking, they tried and then they say, I give up. It's not so crucial, and they don't feel that, immediate threat to their health or something. And they just decide not, or like, whatever, I'm gonna keep continuing eating gluten or smoking when it's not as crucial to their well-being, and they just go back to their normal ways.
Mm-hmm.
How to work with this ambivalence?
Yeah. That's a really good question, and my thought about that is that I'd be really curious about how they were relating to that part of themselves and probably start getting curious about that. Never would I pressure someone to try and be ready for this phase when they're not. Because like everything else, we need to go through it ourselves. And we actually have the intelligence within us at any given moment to know what is needed next to align with one's highest self and to align with that which is most life-affirming for us. And so I would probably just ask that person, what do you think is needed at this time? Mm-hmm. And trust them. Mm-hmm. That they might need a phase of this. They might need to get to know that part of themselves a little bit more. Okay, so we've got, I think, Sarah, since you put this on, I'm curious if you would be willing to step out of a partnership and come do that with me?
Yeah.
So we can all have partners. And what I'd like to ask us to do is get into partners and grab this sheet. You can share it. It's the one with the questions with the different lines. And I'm gonna ask that we each basically take the role of a listener with someone. And you're gonna do that for about 7 minutes. And then we'll switch. And the other person gets to be the listener. And you're gonna ask these questions to that person. And so the questions are, describe a behavior you have engaged in that involves craving and is resolved by short-term or temporary relief. What strategies have you used in the past to motivate behavior change, specifically around that behavior? Do you have a part of you that attempts to control your behaviors or that judges them? And do you have a part of you that justifies these behaviors? Please describe. So the goal now is just to explore these questions with inquiry, not to fix or to solve. So as the listener, you do not need to give advice. You do not need to give tools. All you're doing is holding space to ask these questions. And if you ask them and suddenly you somehow get through them in 2 minutes, then ask them to explore more. Does that make sense? Does that feel clear? So since we're going to be sharing vulnerably, let's just take a moment to acknowledge for one another that what we share in this room is going to be confidential and that we wouldn't be sharing that with others. Can you raise your hand if you can agree to that? Are there other needs that people would like to express around this kind of vulnerable sharing that would, or agreements you'd like to put into this space that would allow you to feel safe and open to sharing this information?
We can stop the video and start it up again if you want that.
Sure. Yeah, I'm totally cool with that. Do people want that? Will you raise your hand if you prefer to have the video turned off? Enough, yeah, let's turn the video on. Reflections about that process. So were there any insights or did anything interesting happen just because of asking those questions? Yeah.
I thought it was interesting when we were talking, I was thinking, well, I don't have any problems with alcohol or cigarettes or, whatever. But then when I was trying to think about, like, behaviors that respond, like, my behaviors that respond to a need, that kind of, like, had a light bulb go off, like, oh, so it is a sort of addictive behavior, even though it's not like a substance,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and addictive behavior doesn't even have to be tangible physically. It could be, fantasizing. It could be a way of responding to oneself. Yeah, totally.
Zola was my partner, and she did such a wonderful job of dialoguing the process, and it really, was such a reflection of my own. She was really generous, and it really helped me see things as well. So that was so nice to hear, because she did such a nice job. I was like, oh yeah, she's exactly right.
Yeah. These parts of us that tend to be reactive are typically reacting because they feel that they are protectors of those needs. And so to the extent that we deny acknowledging and validating the underlying need for the behavior, those parts get even that much more protective and that much more reactive. And so to the extent that we can acknowledge those parts and affirm and validate the need that they are holding, they will tend to not only feel deep relief, but also be much more willing to negotiate, right? And that negotiation is really paramount in long-term behavior change. Because guilt and shame are depleting. And it's tricky because they have this really interesting ability to create reactive action but it doesn't last for very long, and it tends to also generate a cycle of its opposite as well. In other words, if I say, "You're such a terrible person for eating all of the sugar," then I might, in that moment, decide not to do that action, but I might feel so terrible about myself that I end up going and taking some action that later on makes me eat more of the sugar, right? So it's not surprising then when we get to affirm that experience that with compassion, we actually find a kind of a motivation to act, that compassion is activating. We talked about this in class today. It's activating not only physiologically, compassion activates the immune system, but also behaviorally. Compassion sort of inspires a generosity of spirit where those parts of us are like, hey, you know what? I really want to promote your growth. And hey, you know what? I really want to make sure that you are safe. Let's work together. And so even though we think somehow compassion got this this rap, like it's like doing nothing, not at all. For me, compassion is the most motivating current of energy that we can run through our system. All right, someone else had raised their hand also. Yeah.
No, I just wanted to point out that as I was talking to Angela, as soon as I introduced the compassion element in the story, as I was speaking, I came up with strategies. So even before she asked the question, like, oh, so maybe that's what I could do, and that's another thing I could do. It just was almost automatic. You know, it opened up and you like to look at it.
Yeah, and that's so often what happens, that when we bring in compassion, acknowledgement, validation, there is this like creativity that blooms. And by the way, like everything we're saying right now applies to internal conflicts that generate habitual behaviors, but it also applies to community conflict as well. That when there's somebody representing a certain viewpoint, someone else representing its opposite, this strategy of recognizing and acknowledging needs and discovering the non-controversial essence behind them allows for much more collaboration and much more willingness to compromise and to work together in ways that you never would have thought of when it stays in the paradigm of a polarized you versus me, right? So again, it's that current of belonging, that current of togetherness, that current of interconnection that inspires this beautiful strategizing towards harmony and towards unity and towards long-term well-being. Is somebody, if you don't know this word yet, I'm introducing it to you, which I'm excited about. Is anybody vulnerageous enough right now?
Courageous.
Vulnerable and courageous.
Yeah.
To share what they shared with their partner.
Yes, I can do that.
Okay. So here is what I'd like to request. Would you please just share briefly the behavior in 1 or 2
Sure.
sentences? But then would you focus specifically on the ways that you respond? And I don't mean behaviorally, I mean internally. So when this behavior happens, what kind of voices, inner dialogue do you hear?
Sure. It's pretty simple.
Sorry, one more thing. Do you want
Yes.
the camera to be turned off for this?
Is it on?
It's
I,
on.
it's
We
fine.
can also cut
Okay,
it
it's fine.
if you want us to
It's
cut that
okay.
section.
Cool, thank you.
So in short, I have this new pattern, or relatively new, of neediness towards my partner, who is not around much because of his music career, and this is a new. I mean, the fact that he's gone for longer periods is new, and so I have this new need for affection and for physicality that I don't when he's not around. I don't have, and I feel frustrated with myself because I don't like to need anyone, and I don't like to feel that sense of dependence. I don't know if it's an addiction, but definitely, I want the cuddles, I want the comfort, and I want that sense of warmth that when he's not around, I can't quite get from him, and then I get mad at myself because I want to be independent, and I feel that way.
I'm hearing these parts. So right now what I'm going to do is ask you to go towards for the sake of this activity, kind of look at these as different parts, inner parts of you responding. And I'd like to just get clear on what the behavior is. In other words, do you ask for more affection? Do you, like, how does it show up behaviorally?
I get more attached.
So try and tell me, like really what occurs. So do you ask for something from your partner? Do you say certain things to him? Do you,
Sure.
seek out attention from others, etc.?
Thankfully no, or not anymore. That was something more in my 20s. Now, what I do is, yes, I engage more in texting, more than I would normally do when he's far, just to sort of like keep the communication going.
Yeah.
And then I sort of become a little bit more, what's the word? Yeah, a little more demanding, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's something that if he was around, I wouldn't do.
That feels really clear to me. So there's a part of you that is feeling like the amount of affection and touch and interaction that you desire is not being met because he's gone. And that part of you is desiring more touch and affection, and so you're reaching out more often with texting, and in those texts, the tone of your text is more demanding. And then your response to that is judgment of yourself for being that way, because the story is, well, that means I'm needy. That means I'm not independent.
I was raised to be independent.
Right.
I'm an independent woman.
Yeah.
I shouldn't be doing this. What am I doing? I'm a kid. Yeah. That's the talk.
Thank you. So now let's look at, if we can, let's see if we can bring in this mindset of compassion to ask those, what I'm going to call two different parts right now. One is the one that's like, I need more affection, and the other one is like, what the hell, what's the deal? Why do you need so much affection? You're supposed to be independent, okay? Let's start with this part that's like, I need more affection. What are the needs of that part?
Touch. To be seen. To be included. And warmth. I could go on and on.
Thank you, that will do for now. Now, the way that I work with these parts is that I know that I've gotten to a non-controversial need when they agree with each other. So now, that part of you, because this is general right now, I'm gonna guess that the part of you that judges this part might not agree if I make it just a little, if I add a descriptor to it. I need constant touch. Would that part of you that judges this, I'm going to say needy part, would it agree with that as a non-controversial need? You need constant touch from your boyfriend?
No.
No. So now, what is a word you could use to describe this that would satisfy the part that needs it and the part that thinks it's too much to need it constantly?
Healthy amounts.
Okay. So what I'm doing right now with Susanna is something that I would do with a client, where it is going through this process to really get to the non-controversial need. And if we have identified parts, different parts, those parts need to both acknowledge that it is non-controversial in order for us to feel satisfied with that thing. Is that clear to everyone?
Almost.
Say,
It's almost clear.
almost clear.
Yeah.
Let's move through the example and then tell me if it's not. So, just for the sake of time, I'm gonna now go to this other part. I would keep going through like this with a client though and keep working it, but let's go to that other part that says like, you need to be independent. Tell me about the needs of that part.
Well, to be independent.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I can't think of,
No, that's great.
to not be needy. To be enough to myself. That doesn't make sense. To be enough, yeah. To be okay by myself. I guess, sorry, that's what I meant.
Now, do you see any contradictions between these two parts that come out as really obvious?
Yes.
Could we generally say it as this part says you need to not be needy and this part says you have needs?
Sure.
Okay, so whenever we're doing this kind of work, you will identify an internal contradiction between the parts that is basically fundamentally opposite, and it's usually as simple as that. You need to not be needy and you need to, you have needs, okay? So what usually goes on is that this mechanism of this push and pull battle of those internal parts is going on subconsciously all the time and is generating these behaviors that are contradictory behaviors, right? Where you start texting all the time and like that, or then you say like, oh, well, I just don't even need him at all, and maybe I'm not even gonna be with him, or, you know, I don't know what it, but they go extreme and they're undermining one another. So that you never actually get the satisfaction of feeling autonomous, and you never actually get the satisfaction of feeling needed and feeling, you know, loved or cared for. And just like that, and that's just this example, but just like that with any contradiction, that neither of the needs are being met, and guess what? Both of these needs are deeply valid. They've just been distorted to extremes out of defensiveness of sense that they're not going to be met. That's what I was talking about earlier, right? And so part of the work is to get them to negotiate. The way to get them to negotiate is to hear them and to identify and acknowledge the need, but to balance that need. So that it isn't that I need to be touched by my boyfriend all the time whenever I want to in all the ways that I want to, but it is, oh, healthy amounts of touch are a really valid need. That's something I need for my well-being. That means that this has to be one of the things that both of these parts work together towards. And like that, you work through, like we would go through here and say, to be independent, interesting. That's a pretty generalized one, right? Does this part of you over here agree, like if we made it extreme again, like I need to be totally autonomous and not need anybody else? Does this part have a little bit of something to say about that?
Well, sure. I shouldn't need to be included then.
So what is a kind of form of independence that this part of you that knows that you actually, it serves you to be in interdependence with people? What could it agree to about independence?
That it is okay to need to be to be interdependent, to be dependent on others.
Okay, yeah.
It even feels hard to say it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And then I wonder, could this part get on board with, it's important to be okay with being by myself? That doesn't mean that you have to be by yourself all the time.
Sure.
But it's important to learn to be comfortable being by
Sure.
myself.
And in fact, I spend most of my life.
Yeah.
It's something that I can do. you
Yeah.
know.
So as you explore this work with yourself first, which is the first place to start, I would literally like slow it way down. Usually this conversation is happening unconsciously, and then if we make it conscious at all, it happens so quickly that we barely even give it time. We say, no, but this, but no, but this, but no, this, and we go with one or the other depending on what's going on, right? Or both. And to really slow it down and say, hold on, what's the need here of this part? What's the need of this part? And you can imagine that they're having a conversation with each other. And check in. Say, I'm gonna identify the list of needs, and the way that I'll know I really get to a core need is that both of these parts will agree. And it's so amazing because just like Julie was describing, and just as you're kind of demonstrating now, when you get to those core needs, the other part's like, yeah, that is valid. I can be on board with that. And when you come to that need, that will inform the behavior. Like, oh, okay. I either need my partner to be around more, or I need to receive touch in another way. Maybe I need to go dancing, maybe I need to be around friends, maybe I need to get a massage. But regardless of how you apply it, you now know the need, and you commit to meeting that need in a healthy way, right? Okay, so I know we're not going through the whole process, but you get a flavor. Do you have questions about that? Okay, yeah.
Again, just practical for coaching. I assume there is a time for warming up the client to this self-compassion, and it might take weeks, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's not quick,
No.
one time.
And a lot of these things, a lot of what you guys learned from me is like where I'm at with clients like a year in, honestly.
Yeah, that's,
So, you know, I'm doing this work right now with one of my clients. I've been with her for about 3 months. And it is so important that we're really focusing on the process and not the outcome. And it's so easy as a coach or a therapist to say like, well, I learned this, so now I'm gonna go tell you all about it theoretically, and then you should get it.
yeah.
So it's important to really, like, to get to know someone first. You're just asking questions, and you're establishing rapport with them first. You're really learning what are their strategies. So a lot of it first is just questions. Getting to know that person, getting to know how they, and pretty soon if you have this lens, you'll start to see it. And then later on you can say, oh, interesting, I see there's that part of you. Tell me more about that, right? And then you can start to work this stuff in, yeah.
I think this is what I saw in my father when I went home for Christmas. Because it builds resiliency, right? And it goes down on the neural pathways.
I'm not clear about the question.
Well, so when I went home, he's got a mild Alzheimer's, and he was a professional athlete. So he's got this amazing resiliency that he learned through many years of, this is just the way I saw it. And so I went home to see him, and he had this accident happen, and he got really scared. And allopathic medicine didn't really respond to him in a way that I thought was healthy, but there was nothing I could do, and I could get no one else to hear it. And so I honestly thought that he would go like this, because he's compromised. And when I came back after 4 weeks, he didn't. There was something inside him, like on a level that is deeper than, because he's got Alzheimer's, that I was stunned by his resiliency. I'm like, oh my gosh, he didn't go over. I was like, how did he not go over? I expected him to just kind of start sliding, and I thought to myself, it must be all his lifetime of this resiliency that he had, got through lots of his, just kind of, because he was gone through a lot of, I thought it was his athletic training, is this resiliency, and I actually saw it. I saw, oh my goodness, I am shocked that he did not decline.
Yeah.
And that's what I see what you're talking about here. It's like, you practice this, and it becomes part of your neural pathways in a way that, in his situation, that he doesn't even that much cognitive control, and it's still held up for him. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, so, yeah, that's a whole thing we could talk about for so long, is like, especially in Alzheimer's, seeing the kind of core habit patterns and strategies and ways of being really pronounced when a lot of the other cognitive faculties decline. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, it's also very powerful with clients to call it apart rather than, because they think it's this need, is their whole identification.
Mhm.
So I just think doing that activity would really help them get some distance from who they truly are and this behavior and these thoughts. So.
Yeah. And that's pointing again to this larger process of remembering who you really are, and that we start to identify with these thoughts, these ways of being. We say, that's who I am. Fundamentally, we forget. So this speaks to the work of Carol Dweck, who is really the first one to present growth mindset. So let me kind of clearly establish that for us. So essentially, for Dweck, she did a lot of she's a Stanford researcher, and she's in the social psychology field, and a lot of her research was on children, but I think it's quite applicable for adults as well. And she essentially was looking at two different kinds of intelligences, and she calls one fixed mindset, and she calls the other growth mindset. And essentially with fixed mindset, there's the sense that a failure means something about implicitly who you are. And with growth mindset, it's simply a recognition that there's a challenge to be overcome and that it's something that you're learning, basically. So with, for instance, with fixed mindset, the belief is that the capacities that I have are kind of there at birth, or the talents that I have. And so if I try something, it doesn't work out, it means I just don't have that capacity. And with growth mindset, it is that capacities are learned through process, through experience. Is that clear to everyone?
And can you change a person from fixed to growth mindset? Or
So, I'm sort of mincing words here, but I don't believe we can actually change other people, but I do believe people can choose to learn this. And I think that we can certainly teach, share this information with people and support them in noticing for themselves. So ways to do that. One is storytelling, and that's the second activity that we're going to do with each other, is just simply getting people to remember times for themselves where they have overcome adversity. And connect to those parts of themselves that allowed them to persevere through that. And to call on those parts of themselves to move through the challenges they're currently experiencing. So let me come back for a moment to the adversity research, because I mentioned there was contradictory research. In the original research, it was essentially, it looked like a kind of one-to-one correlation, where the more adverse childhood experiences you had, the more likely you were to demonstrate addictive behavior. Well, Siri and others came in and started looking at what does that really look like over time. And what they found is that relative to no adversity or very extreme adversity, hi Christine, sorry, that's okay. Moderate amounts of adversity were actually correlated with better health outcomes and more ability to respond. Now, some of what's occurring there is time of the adversity. So very early childhood experiences can tend to shape one's response patterns more. very traumatic experiences tend to shape one's response patterns more. And then a high number of them tend to shape one's response patterns more. But regardless of when or to what extent adversity has been experienced, we have neuroplasticity throughout life, and we have the capacity to develop resilience throughout life. And one of the factors is not just the occurrence of the adverse experience, but also the resources one has to respond to the adverse experience. All challenging experiences are not created equally. To the extent that someone perceives that a difficult experience is going to be overwhelming to them and that they will not be able to respond, it is that much more likely to impact them negatively. And that's a really important thing for us to remember as coaches, because what that means is that the more resourced we support our clients in being, the more resilient they will be to their adversity. It is an impossibility to say that what we're doing as coaches or therapists is making sure that someone doesn't have challenges in their life. Now, that doesn't mean that we wouldn't be in support of those challenges being minimized to the extent that they're harmful to that person. But to the extent that it is inherent to the human experience to have adversity and challenge, we have the opportunity to teach ourselves and to teach others the capacity to respond towards growth in a way that not only allows us to overcome the challenge, but also brings us a greater degree of self-awareness, and that self-awareness allows us to respond to future adversity better. It also was found by CIIS that when we have experienced a moderate level of diversity, we are less likely to catastrophize perceived challenge. That's really important. And it is also a beautiful capacity of humanity to find meaning in suffering, to find growth from challenge, find opportunity from challenge. And that's what CIIS refers to as the protective effect of adversity. Not only are we more likely to, when we choose to embody a growth mindset, we're more likely to have the parts of our brain light up after a perceived failure that are about learning about the reason and why and finding a new strategy. But we are also more likely to ask for support and thus create social connectivity that has a protective effect on our health. And arguably, in a spiritual perspective, those challenges come to us as deep gifts that expose to us the places within us that are embodying that sense of separation, that are embodying that sense of judgment. And in that exposure is the remedy, is the knowledge of how to realign with wholeness. And so the very things that we have been rejecting and have been judging there can be an alchemy where that transforms instead to the roadmap back to wholeness, if we can give it space, if we can bring that inquiry. Thoughts about that? What I find is that on the like human personality level, I'm like, no, that's horrible. I don't want it to be hard, and I want all the things to be fixed. And at the soul level, I'm like, I want to learn compassion. I want to learn what unconditional love is. I want to learn how to stand with nobility in the face of difficulty and judgment and criticism from others and still bring a sense of compassion. And the only way I can learn those things is through direct experience. And the only way I can develop personal trust is through direct experience of the thing. not because someone else told me, as you. So if I say to you, well, guess what? You know, if you do these things, you'll trust yourself more. It doesn't really matter that much to you until you've done it. And that's the motivation of the soul, that growth. So to whatever extent we can connect with that part of ourselves, we can bring a little bit more ease, a little less resistance, and instead start looking for the resources, and instead start getting curious about the needs and like that. Sarah?
How do you reconcile, because I'm with you on sort of welcoming these things and seeing these challenges with as opportunities, and the things that have been most challenging, to look at them and how they've shaped your life and how they've changed you, but also sometimes in welcoming those challenges and knowing that you're open to sort of the spiritual path. Sometimes I feel like I have to steel myself for, oh no, what's coming next so I can grow, you know, and I don't want to change it, but sometimes I find that fear coming in where you have removed some of the coping mechanisms to deal with that, and you know that you've opened yourself up to it. How do you kind of reconcile with that? And I don't know if you experience that fear sometimes.
Oh, yeah. What I have learned to describe that as is the inherent fear of uncertainty and choice. We all have this part that wants to be totally autonomous and that wants to be empowered in our choice and like that. And then there's this other part that is frozen, does not want to choose, does not want to try new things, because that part of us feels that we could be wrong. And it is a risk. I'm just realizing in this moment that I didn't thank you for sharing, because that was a risk as well, and thank you for that. And just like you did, it is a risk to make a choice. It is a risk to make a statement towards anything, because in that moment of choosing, or in that moment of identifying with, you are taking the risk that you could be perceived as wrong, or that the response from others is that you don't belong. And that's a huge risk. And to the extent that we are still allowing our rightness or our belonging to the human community to be in question, we will have resistance to uncertainty. Now, uncertainty is inherent to life. And in my deepest sessions with my clients, those are the kind of contradictions that we're going towards, and the kinds of truths that the kind of essential, non-controversial needs that come out are like, they always end up sounding like the noble truths that the Buddha spoke when he first came out of meditation. Like, it's beautiful, the level of wisdom that we have within us. And so it starts to sound things like, uncertainty is inherent to life because everything changes. And there is a part of me which will unwaveringly support my own safety and growth. And to the extent that you can feel trust in that part of you and aligned with that part of you, you start to, or at least for me, I've started to experience much less resistance to potential outcomes being right or wrong, because it doesn't feel like that anymore. It feels much more like this is all information. And so even in those very difficult moments, I have started to develop a trust. Not that I know what the outcome will be, not that I'll get what I want ultimately at all, but that there is a trust that I will respond towards that which is life affirming to me, respond in my highest good. I don't know if that really addresses the question, but
so. Yeah.
that's how it's been for me. So I'd like to do another activity around this. And the activity is it comes from Kelly McGonigal, and Kelly McGonigal has taken a lot of, she's also down at Stanford, and she's taken a lot of Carol Dweck's work, along with a lot of other amazing work that's going on down there, and translated especially in work around stress. So, you know, we could speak about adversities and challenges, we could speak about stress, really it's the same. And she wrote a book called The Upside of Stress, and she's really looking at how stress can support us in being motivated, in finding resilience, etc. So one of her practices, which I'm gonna ask us to engage in now, and which I think can be great to do with clients, really in a conversational format, that she calls storytelling. And storytelling is just simply what I mentioned earlier, which is remembering a time when you experienced a challenge and you overcame it. And then tapping into or calling to mind those qualities within you that you used during that time. And what has been found is that simply doing that, and the effects are true whether it's you saying the story or whether it's hearing someone else say the story, interestingly. So that just doing that allows us to develop this kind of growth mindset that makes us more open to behaviors, etc. So let's grab a new partner, and then these are listed again on that last page of the handout. But the questions we're going to ask each other are to think of a time when you experienced a major challenge and persevered. And there's a list of questions: what happened and why was it important, etc. And then how can you apply that to your current situation? So
You still want to do
let's turn the camera off again, and then go ahead and we'll do again 7 minutes, and then we'll switch. So I'll let you know when to switch from everyone or some of us. What themes emerged in the sharing of those stories? Yeah.
The theme of non-attachment emerged from Yvette, from the story that she told, and that resonated with me so much because that's something that I attempt to remain aware of when I am experiencing challenges, is non-attachment. That is to attempt to do something and perhaps not have success in it, but to understand that I don't have to be attached to that process. There are many other ways to accomplish the larger goal that I'm seeking. Mm-hmm. And so that was something that was really important, because I think that when we struggle with staying in one mode in terms of trying to accomplish a goal or respond to a challenge, that the attachment becomes the agitation. So non-attachment, that whole theme of non-attachment is very resonant.
Would it be correct to say openness to new strategies?
Certainly.
Thank you. What else?
For us, I've had similar, and I think it was kind of, in the past when we were younger, we overcame a lot of obstacles, and it's, what helped is this kind of childhood curiosity and openness, and just simply believing in yourself without overthinking it. Mm-hmm. And that's a part that can help in the current situation with the same, like establishing a coaching career or something. Just do it basically and have this challenge, you know, childlike courage without overthinking.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you. What other themes emerged? Yeah.
I know the theme is, but we both went through, I mean, very significant, probably a little more significant, but these things to do with our physical well-being. And the interesting thing was that she had a lot of support during that time, and I felt like I was shocked by being more isolated during that time when I expected it. But we both came out of it understanding that that was our particular lesson for us, and that these things that, you could feel no gratitude about, that we feel ultimately very grateful because we knew the lesson inherent in it. And we even talked about, like, in a way we know, she said, beckoned it into our lives, and that there is this quiet acceptance of something so huge because of the gifts it afforded us. And so it was really interesting to have disparate experiences of it and still coming to the same sort of place about it.
Yeah.
So Visona shared, and this really resonated with me because it took me quite a while in my life to learn this particular lesson, but to be able to sit with the deep pain and to not just keep going and going and going, like, you know, oh, I'm going to keep it moving, I'm just going to move forward, and oh, it doesn't bother me that much, that's okay, that's just what it is. But to just really actually feel it and be okay with it and acknowledge it. So basically not spiritually bypassing. Right. So.
Beautiful. Thank you.
With resonated themes of perspective and kind of widening the lens and zooming out, and the idea of seeing things from that different perspective had allowed us to kind of, like, zooming out allowed us to zoom back in with more consciousness and compassion.
I think we both recognized that we had resources at our disposal that supported us in the time of challenge, whether that was friends or family. And also both of us kind of talked about a challenge where we felt like we had a definite defining point in our life that, looking back on it, we appreciate that time shift in our lives.
So like appreciating the transition, or?
Yeah, I think also the resources that were, there supporting us during our shift.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I think I got that one.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing those. Well, what I wanted to do, I want to share one last piece of information, which is just some tips. I kind of want to summarize a few tips and say a few I didn't say specifically around working with clients about supporting developing growth mindset for long-term behavior change. We've touched on some of them, and you all have outlined some beautiful things here. Was it, what was the effect? Could I hear from one person of what was the effect of just remembering that time and how you overcame that challenge? What was the effect for you?
I think it builds in a sense of pride and accomplishment, and you feel like you can go do it. Like, you can really conquer other things by remembering, oh yeah, I did that.
Beautiful. If you don't know this about me, I'm an etymology geek. I love the history of words and where they came from, so I had to go look at fail. And I was quite interested in that it has this kind of surface meaning, which is like to not perform as expected. But that it also has this other meaning that we use it for, which is to cease to exist or function. And that really struck me deeply when I was thinking about what we're saying when we say we've failed. That we might be, on the surface, we might be saying, oh, well, I, didn't perform as expected, but I wonder how much that feels to us like ceasing to exist. And just what that might feel like to our soul. And so to remember these times where we went through a challenge and didn't stop existing. it was just really, really hard. And maybe even we learned some of these things can be very motivating, or at least soothing. So a couple of practical tips. One of the things that Carol Dweck says that came from a really cool high school that stopped giving Fs, you know, in the grading scale. It's like A, B, C, D, not yet. So they don't say fail anymore. They just say not yet, and they had a huge improvement in grades, and their graduation rates went up. And so just exploring using that language with clients when they say, noticing perhaps if a client is saying, I can't, or I don't know how, and to reframe that as, oh, so you don't know how to do that yet. That's something you haven't done yet. I worked with a client, her goal was to do a handstand. It was very wonderful, but of course it had all these like very deep metaphors for her. And she had started out with that idea of like, I can't do handstand. And I just kept saying, oh, you haven't done handstand yet. And she was like, oh, yeah. Just educating clients about the research that's out there in a simple and accessible way that can be really helpful. The language that Dweck proposes to use is to say, every time you push out of your comfort zone to learn something and stick to it, the neurons can form new and stronger connections and over time create behavior change. Again, she typically works with students in schools, and what she found when just educating them on that simple idea showed sharp increase in grades in that school. So reminding people that the more they try, the more likely they are to succeed. Storytelling, just as we did, can be really helpful. Asking these questions to your clients, asking them to recall times where they've overcome challenges, or telling stories of your own, or asking them to talk to other people. There's a beautiful story in the yoga tradition, or is it even the yoga tradition? I think it's actually, might even be in the Buddhist tradition, but where there's a mother whose child dies suddenly, and she's of course in deep grief. And she goes to her meditation teacher, her spiritual teacher, and says, like, I don't know what to do. I'm done. And he says, I want you to go to every house and knock on the door and ask them, find a house where no one has died in their family. And so she goes around and knocks on, of course, at every door, someone has died. And so she gets to hear those stories. And in hearing those stories, it heals her. Because she remembers again that she belongs. And that's another deep gift of suffering that we forget about, or of adversity, is that it actually helps us to feel a sense of belonging to the world, that others also experience this pain. The contradictions work can be really simplified too, to just say, wow, I noticed that it sounds like you have two opposing goals for yourself here. How do you want to resolve that? And opening up a conversation around needs that in that way. As a coach, to really notice and bring attention to the process over the outcome. To really recognize when someone is engaging in the process of behavior change. And as well as, not identifying characteristics inherent to a person, like intelligence or talent, but instead to recognize actions that they have taken and capacities and resources that they have access to. Acknowledging especially someone's dedication and effort and learning. Wow, I've noticed that, you've committed to coming in and talking to me about these things for 2 months now. I just wanna acknowledge what dedication it takes to come in here and be so vulnerageous every week.
Oh, I just wanted to mention
Yeah.
something. I went to a training for diabetes educators, and they were talking about coaching principles for helping people with their blood sugar, and they were saying, we want you to really like acknowledge the people for even tracking their blood sugar. Doesn't matter what the numbers are. Just want to promote that them just daily doing the behavior, doing the action is more important than the actual 140, 180, 120. They want to just really, promote that when the person comes in.
And I would say even ideally, I just have 2 more points and then I'm gonna open up to questions. I know we are 5 minutes over time now. Ideally, we will also inspire an internal celebration and acknowledgement of oneself. So to the extent that we can do that, did you celebrate yourself for your efforts? How might you be able to do that in this process? Bringing attention to resources. Now, we don't all have access to all resources. You know, often one thing with coaches is that they can easily prescribe and advise first resources of what I would call like resources of privilege, like going to a yoga class or going and buying nothing but organic food or something like that. So just really arming yourself with a spectrum of resources. Those can be internal, meditation, self-reflection, journaling, emotional processing. Those can be external, whether it is something like food or body movement, touch, laughter, social connectedness. Really getting people to identify resources that are available to them. And then finally, modeling compassionate determination and compassionate curiosity in the way that you relate to people, so that when they come in and are, speaking in a way that it seems reflective of an inner judgment, you can model compassion for that situation. And you may do that with yourself by saying, like, I know when I experience judgment, I do this thing and I experience judgment, and I've learned to respond to myself with a little bit of curiosity, and here's how I do it. So those are my practical tips. I think I will end with that and just open it to questions. I guess what I'll say is that at this time, if you need to leave, that's totally understandable, and I'm available to questions by email. And then I can stay for about 5 or 10 more minutes. If you want to stay and ask questions, let's do that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.